The good thing is it automatically picks up on our microphone. Actually, Jason doesn't have a mic on.
Oh, thanks.
Wait, why are we putting our computers?
Oh, just like in case you guys want to
Okay.
search.
Yeah.
Because
No, like Google Meets or anything.
dude, I don't want to be wrong about facts.
Yeah. Spew some bullshit.
I mean, yeah, technically we live in a different society now, so we have to live by different standards. Right. I don't know if
Is
I'm
it
gonna,
recording?
yeah, it is.
Oh,
I don't know if I'm gonna leave that part in. But yeah, no, it's been like what, a good month, and a lot has changed. A lot has changed. Actually, before you got here, Han, Jason and I were talking about how concerned we were with the future of Korea.
Okay. Oh, that's how we started. Okay.
No, because I keep tabs on the foreign exchange rates, right?
Okay.
Because obviously my parents live in Toronto. I actually had to make a final wire for my angel check to a friend in New York.
Okay.
And the fluctuations were driving me fucking insane. Right now it's settled at 14.66 per US dollar.
It's crazy.
1466 Korean won.
Yeah, per US dollar.
It's like back in 2008, really.
Yeah. Earlier this year, it was around 1350.
1350.
I don't know what happened. So, like, not just the foreign exchange, there's also active concerns called out by the governor of the Bank of Korea about how Korea's expected growth rate over the next decade is under 2%, which is very low, especially for a country with a GDP per capita well under $40,000. It's just over 30, right? So, like, and whereas America is growing at a very brisk pace of 2% plus per year, and there's no expectations of it slowing down anytime soon. So, like,
Tariffs kind of slowed it down, apparently.
yeah.
Anyway, that's a side.
Do you really want to get into
Yeah, well, no, we were just talking about something.
So no, like, just living in Korea. How are you feeling right now? I hear like we're already in a recession. Is what I'm hearing. Do you feel it?
Is that true?
In Korea,
Like technically?
like no, it's not official yet.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay,
based on how people are feeling and consuming the consumption patterns, I can feel it. I feel like
It's a
we're already,
vibe recession.
yeah.
That's the thing.
yeah.
The vibes are bad, yeah.
Like I'm eating out less. I'm
Oh,
cooking at home a lot more. I'm just generally consuming less, and I could see that the companies around me are seeing with their customer base, they're consuming less of their service or product. How are you guys feeling? Like, especially you, because you run a business and you know other founders as well, right?
Yeah. Well,
Long
I mean, I definitely think that people are anxious, and people are spending less. People are more stressed out, and I think people will feel that way in the States as well. But in terms of Korea, I think most of that source of anxiety is political, right? Currently.
The
Rather
political
than-
instability.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people are going to protests every day, every week. People don't know if our president's going to be impeached or not. And that just doesn't help in terms of consumer confidence and just national pride. Everyone isn't, like, no one's super proud of being Korean right now. I felt like that was a different issue when we were growing up in, like, let's say early 2000s. I mean, definitely the 2002 World Cup helped a lot.
Oh yeah.
But people were proud to be Korean, and I can't say that that's the case today. And I think, again, a lot of that has to do with political issues. Because we have a pretty fucked up political system. Like, even compared to other countries. Like I wouldn't say that we have the best political.
Wait, which countries are you comparing it to?
Like worldwide, like
No.
I mean,
Because I have very.
Singapore is like a pretty high standard of government efficiency compared to them. We kind of suck. Like
Oh, okay. So like, I feel like before we move on with this issue, because I do want to touch on all of this. Jason, how are you feeling in terms of the recession? Do you agree with his sentiment that it's primarily politically driven right now in Korea?
I think with the advent of Trump administration, obviously Korean government has faced its own issues enough to not be able to react to this new transition. So definitely it has hit the businesses pretty negatively in terms of like when it's about to when it says it's going to impose tariffs on like the iron ores or whatnot, some of the most reliant part of this economy are semi-finished goods, like China, But then, what do those companies need most is some kind of government deal that, oh, you guys are going to be safe from this so-called tariff umbrella, and we're going to keep you in as long as you guys manufacture goods somewhere like U.S. friendly environments. But they haven't done that anyway. So, like, long story short, I think they're suffering with the FX rates because the exports are getting downhill a lot. It has eaten into their profits because most of people hail Korean economy as somewhat like very techy and advanced, but the inconvenient truth that we still refuse to kind of accept as if we're all about manufacturing still.
Yes.
Yeah. Cosmetics, it's manufacturing. Auto, manufacturing. Semiconductors, there's no part of this economy that's not free from the so-called capex reliant environment in terms of investment. And where did capital come from? It's all about like the institution or enterprise-oriented investments, right? And all the capital comes from the so-called government-backed institutions like 중소기업청 or in the larger scale like banks, first-tier banks. But we don't have systems like MBS getting liquidated in the market like we discussed before.
For those of you who are listening who don't know what MBS is, not Mohammed bin Salman, it's mortgage-backed securities. Yeah, just want to clarify there. Dude, also you are like vibing with what he's spitting.
Yeah, because I tried to do a SaaS startup before geared towards IT startups, other IT startups. And I thought Korea is an advanced enough economy where the pool of customers would be big enough to warrant such an item, and I I would be able to find enough customers. But as Jason said, Korea is still mostly manufacturing based, so like the proportion of IT based companies out of all the companies in Korea was so much lower than I initially expected.
I feel like in terms of raw numbers, I don't agree with that, but in terms of economic output, I would agree. So like so much of the Korean GDP is dependent on manufacturing, but in terms of like the number of companies, because there's so many smaller software firms that just simply don't have the cash to put up.
Right, but essentially
the numbers, because I looked at the numbers too.
How much are the numbers? What's the numbers?
Like overwhelming 99.9999% of SMBs are manufacturing based.
That is
It's surprising.
Yeah, that is super surprising.
I mean, I probably have it.
It's fine. I trust you. I know your research.
It's like it was like mostly. It's like it blew my mind. 99. I do think that it was 99% of SMBs. We're not talking about like big companies.
No, but even the big companies, they're predominant, like they're crown jewels in their business empires. It's mostly manufacturing. SK, I used to think of those guys as telecommunications guys. No, they're semiconductor guys now.
Oh yeah,
right. Hanwha, they're supposed to be Hanwha Life and financials and shit like that. No, it's Hanwha Ocean and Hanwha Aerospace, and it's just like was it defense manufacturing, right? So I can completely see this country is headed in the way of Japan, but before we head off on that tangent, I want to get back to political systems because you mentioned a very interesting point where Korea has this political system that is striped for bipartisan, like was it polarization, right? So in Canada, we work on a very different system. We work on the Westminster system, which I think it has a myriad of different flaws. But
No system is perfect.
no system is perfect, but every country that has the Westminster system, it's you get a lot more third parties that enter the Congress, and as a result, they form coalitions and they try to come up with essentially they mitigate against each other from pulling the country apart.
Yeah.
Is what I find. Germany's been doing this for the better part of 70 years after the war, and so far they've been doing a pretty good job at not making the Nazi party come back, right? So, but then you take a look at like America, which Korea's system is heavily based off of, right? And America's facing a lot of the same issues, right? Do you think there's a way to salvage this system? I'm just curious.
I know people are talking about switching from
The presidential system to the Westminster system. I mean, Japan has, but here's the thing.
Japan is like that. Right?
Yeah, my counter argument is Japan has the Westminster system and like their political situation is not any better.
Yeah.
They've been living for like the better part of a century under a one-party system, like communist China.
Yeah.
Or you can go the other way where you give the executive branch a bit more power than it had before.
A bit more power than it had before.
Yeah.
Like what sorts of powers?
Well, not so specifically. I meant Korean. Under the Korean system, presidents only have one term. I'm not talking about like a what is it like a second term?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
a two-term.
A two-term system.
A two-term limit.
Yeah.
As opposed to a single-term limit.
Yep. Because you mean not only will the president technically be president for a longer period of time, but I think there's different incentives if you have another term coming up versus if you're like a one shot like.
Right.
Oh yeah, yeah. You have to make something happen.
Yeah, make something happen and get people
4 years.
aligned
Yep.
and people
Right.
do some sort of politics for that, and it's just like a whole different system.
And I feel like that's that kind of correlates to what Trump administration did in the first few months of the term, right? Like, oftentimes when we see like M&As happening, we see new CEOs jumping onto this enterprises. They love the strategy of Big Bet, which as soon as they rise to their offices, they just like explode everything that the ongoing issues the previous CEOs had with their management. So, for example, let's just say that enterprise has a portfolio of companies that are failing that was done on M&A during the previous CEO's term. Then what the next CEO would do is just wrap them up, agree to like just tell straight out to PwC or Deloitte that, oh, these companies are going shit and they're technically bankrupt, so we're just gonna write them off of our balance sheet. And that eats into the net income in the
Short term.
yeah, in the short term, right? So that when they do the IR in the earnings call, the performance tanks, but then the stock price goes up. Because what the retail investors and institutional investors see is that there's no way else to go but up.
I see. So take the losses up front.
Yeah, and I don't think things are a little different in terms of political parties or systems. I don't think the Korean presidents were really that into Big Bath strategy.
What? Big bet?
Big Bath.
Big bath?
Yeah, Bath.
Oh.
Yeah, I've never heard of this strategy either.
Yeah.
Oh, it's an accounting tactic.
Yep.
Where the income in the bad year, okay, it's made to look even worse than.
So it's kind of a niche strategy, I'd say, that is deployed by CEOs who used to be CFOs or they have like accounting background.
I love how
They just love this
Investopedia puts it. a big bath is an unethical accounting tactic whereby income in a bad year is made to look even worse than it actually is.
Yeah, yeah. But nowadays, I think it's used more in for management who just recently rose to their offices.
I mean, like, you're gonna have to. So, like, I think the main point that we want to get across is that if we have too short of a term limit, the lack of continuity in terms of policy between the people in power creates a turbulence in the markets that makes it very difficult to run a business, right?
So, and yeah, I mean, the one point that I did want to clarify was I'm okay with like the prime, like what is it, like a system that's similar to Canada's. I'm okay with having a 2-term limit. What I think we should do is do something, because the current system is not working. That's my whole point.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's making everyone
Right.
feel anxious. Again, capex is at probably like an all-time low, going lower.
Yeah,
GDP as a result is tanking.
Yeah. So then let's go back to like Korea's over-reliance on manufacturing, because Trump is trying to bring back manufacturing,
Yeah.
right?
That's
Oh, yeah.
interesting.
Like manufacturing isn't inherently bad in and of itself, but what you're saying is there are systemic issues that are at play that's preventing this country from becoming a better version of itself. Is what both of you are saying. I'm curious, like what you guys are thinking regarding that.
I think the strategy of onshoring the companies, it's like onshoring the big tech. There's no difference in onshoring the big tech companies into your homeland versus like the onshoring the manufacturing companies in your homeland in terms of like tax incentive issues. After all, the great thing about onshoring the companies, great companies into your homeland, is that you get to collect more taxes. And naturally, if you collect more taxes, you don't have to print more bonds to sort of subsidize that budget deficit that you're experiencing, which kind of leads to less, a more control for the government or the federal bank in terms of monetary policy. Because more bonds you issue, the cheaper your currency is going to be in the long term, right? So that kind of gives more power to the central system to sort of control the right measures, deploy right measures to keep the economy in check. But once you kind of like deploy tariffs as a tactic to onshore the companies, I think that media is kind of lost because they know that it's going to cost more in the States to build something, because you're going to like whatever the manufacturing, sure, the raw materials put into it, all the equipment, but then there's the so-called salaries part of it, and if that salary part is going to increase, as in terms of also the import cost of the raw materials that you have to onshore, like you can do it for free in Korea because you have like manufacturing in Korea, but then now you have to export them or import them. Then all that cost associated with it, it's just going to make the cost of the goods even higher than it used to be. If the cost of the goods are higher, then sure, it's going to be reflected in the inflationary measures in the FRED. And if the FRED keeps that inflation, breaks down the inflationary increase into different parts, then what I see happening is that it's going to happen a lot for non-necessary goods like auto or energy or other like phones, semiconductors and whatnot. Everything else is going to be expensive. So what I'm saying is people are going to start spend only towards the products that really matter in terms of like literally putting the bread on the table. Yeah, like groceries. Like what if people just do groceries and buy nothing else to contribute to the market consumption? Then that's recession, right?
Interesting.
So that's my theory of on this. When I speak of the flaws of tariffs to onshore the companies, I'm just saying that it's going to exacerbate the recession even quicker.
Well, this just relates to the States, right? Because we're talking about tariffs.
Yeah. This is U.S. specific.
I love how we went from manufacturing to
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was my follow-up question.
Yeah.
Like, what's your thoughts on tariffs? Right? No, but like,
Yeah.
here's the thing. We all live in an export-driven economies. Like Canada is primarily dependent on natural resource exports to the United States. Korea is dependent on semi-finished goods and finished goods exports to the United States.
Yeah.
The United States is unequivocally the consumerist capital of the world, right?
Mm.
So, like, yeah. So but tariffs, I agree, it's inflationary. But if it works to bring on companies and to bring on manufacturing to the United States, is it not like fulfilling its purpose? If it serves to meet that goal. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. To be fair,
Yeah.
I'm Canadian. I'm against these tariffs,
Mm-hmm.
so we're all on the same page.
So I think there needs to be a math done by the administration in terms of reaping the benefits of onshoring, having other overseas companies situating their facilities or subsidiaries in the States. So all the tax benefits, reaping the tax volume that you get to reap from these companies versus the inflationary pressures in the consumer economy. And I think the government sort of there needs to be the allocation done, or the government allocates this tax money to here. And if that doesn't happen, then obviously all these federal fundraising has to be deployed to put pressure on the economy.
I think the latest that I've read is that Trump is thinking using the tariff revenues to fund his sovereign wealth fund,
So,
which is questionable.
but does the U.S. need a sovereign wealth fund?
That's my other question too. But like before we get there, there's also claims that look, automobile manufacturing plants, just because you place a tariff, aren't going to pop up overnight in Detroit, Michigan, and the surrounding areas. It's going to take 5+ years.
Mhm.
Are tariffs a good incentive then to get manufacturers to build in America? Because Joe Biden tried the other way, right? He offered a shit ton of incentives.
Yeah,
And Trump is
subsidy.
saying, that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to hit them with tariffs, beat them over the head with a giant fucking stick, and then they'll get the message and build in America. Like, which approach, objectively, do you think is more efficient in driving onshoring?
I don't think subsidy is a great approach. I mean, it's
I've
exact-
heard like economists argue against subsidies as well.
So subsidies entirely, it just beats the very purpose of putting tariffs in. No, subsidy beats the purpose of onshoring companies, because what I said before is you get to reap the taxes from these companies that are getting onshored into your homeland, right? And onshore, the more companies onshored in your homeland to build goods,
More tax revenue.
naturally, more foreign direct capital is going to come into your country, and that kind of drives puts the resting heart rate for inflation higher than what it used to be.
Okay.
So it's always going to be increasing for countries like States or Singapore that attract foreign capital. That's just how it goes. But then, so you gotta like put subsidize, use monetary policy at the expense of the government to keep this in check. But then, if you don't keep this in check, and if you end up subsidizing the onshoring companies, then you're creating a deficit that cannot be used to subsidize the economy.
I think what he's arguing is essentially onshoring is inherently inflationary due to the inflow of foreign capital, right?
Yeah.
And then what he's saying is what you're supposed to then do is offset the inflationary pressure from foreign direct capital by decreasing the government's budget to essentially offset the monetary supply. But if
you're
you
flooding the market with
Yeah,
more subsidies,
exactly.
then you're
Yeah.
setting
Double
fuel
whammy.
to the flame. Yeah.
So there has to be some kind of artificial inverse relationship that you have to create. But it wouldn't be possible if you start racking on deficit in this part.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then now I'm curious too, because tariffs don't serve the same purpose. It doesn't serve the purpose that you're trying to get across, right? Because it's not decreasing the government budget, but Doge is technically. Yeah. How just curious, how are you guys feeling about Doge? It doesn't impact us directly.
Okay, can I talk more about
Tariffs?
offshoring companies?
Yeah.
I love it. I'm actually learning a lot. 'Cause
So,
I didn't actually know about this. So
Um,
I love it.
what I'm saying about onshoring companies, it's B2B tax, right?
B2B tax.
It's not government benefiting from the income tax
Okay.
of these companies getting
Yeah.
offshore.
Yeah.
Well, sure, there may be some,
Yeah.
but given that these the jobs created are minuscule,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm seeing is there's a greater benefit in terms of the corporate tax for these onshore
Okay.
companies.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But then, is this enough to subsidize the inflationary market or inflationary pressures on the economy? Because I feel like I have a hunch. I mean, I don't have the data, but I also have a hunch that it's more expensive to control the inflation,
Expensive in terms of what?
the costs associated with controlling the inflation.
What sorts of costs are you
Yeah, yeah.
talking about?
In terms of like subsidizing the inflationary pressures on the consumer goods.
Oh,
to
so you mean
keep it
offering
in check.
consumer subsidies?
Yes.
Interesting. Why would, but wouldn't that also inherently be inflationary? Because you're injecting cash into the system.
Or correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that like no one wants hyperinflation,
Yeah.
and hyperinflation sucks for consumers.
Mhm.
Now you gotta balance the cons of high inflation versus the pros of having higher corporate tax. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Like net
yeah.
good on society,
Uh-huh.
like you have to
It
balance
just-
the two.
It just has to net out in theory, but it's
But like, if you think about in terms of theory, right? What you're claiming is that onshoring companies bringing in foreign companies to do more business in the States, that's inherently inflationary. But then, what I think your solution, the consumer subsidies, is also inflationary because that's injecting capital into the system, right? I feel like then it's a catch-22 for the United States, is it not? Because bringing in foreign companies, onshoring them into the United States is inflationary, but it's bad for the U.S. consumer. And 70% of the United States GDP is driven by the consumer. So then it's a matter of, do we just accept high unemployment in certain areas and have cheap goods for everyone, or do we have more expensive goods for everyone but have jobs for everyone? I feel like that's the trade-off that we're supposed to be making.
But I think, personally, I think Trump is glorifying the aspect of U.S. having in control of these productions. For example, the reason why he doesn't want semiconductors offshore is because he doesn't want the U.S. to lose the grip on the semiconductor space, right?
Would you not argue that the semiconductor industry is now more of a matter of national security?
Yeah.
That is what he's arguing.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of that national security group,
Right.
he wants more leverage so that he doesn't want to have to beg for Taiwan or China to lose this so-called diplomacy game.
So I understand for semiconductors,
Yeah.
but like why, for example, automotive manufacturing? Why automotive manufacturing?
Why does he want to bring that back?
Yeah.
I've been trying to formulate this thought in my mind. So let me give it a go. I think the whole thing about tariffs is Trump is no fucking economist.
Absolutely
he's
not.
He's a fucking marketer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why he's blasting tariffs isn't because he's like a PhD level economist, as I said. It's because of his political base. Like he wants the nationalism. He's a populist, whether people like it or not. He catered towards white men. That's a fact. And to white men, if a presidential candidate or a president goes like, I'm gonna give you a job, you white man, you've been ignored. I'm gonna give you a job. I'm gonna fucking penalize everyone else. China, fuck, they're your enemies. I'm gonna get taxes from them, but I'm gonna give you a job.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give you a job making cars. It's like the voter base is like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna vote for that guy. It's that simple.
So
He's
that
just
work-
catering towards his political base, and he's just not putting much thought as we are in terms of like the economic like effects of his like policies.
Yeah.
He's just, it's all political for him, is what I think.
So that got him the job.
That got him the job.
But now what next?
What next?
Just, he has to
I
deliver.
mean, he has to deliver now.
Right?
Yeah.
But like, so there's a huge Ford manufacturing plant in the Greater Toronto area. There's a huge Honda plant in the GTA.
So why cars is his political base is like white men
Right.
in those areas.
But at the same time, those guys are going out to buy cars, and as soon as the tariffs were placed into effect for like the 24 hours that they were in effect, car dealerships were marking up their cars by 25%.
Because it's inflationary
Yeah.
tariffs and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Okay.
Like a Dodge Ram 1500 fully optioned out cost $80,000 US. All of a sudden, dealers were charging 10,000 because 100,000.
Isn't that good for car manufacturers though? 'Cause they
Right, but it's-
sell for a higher.
But it's bad for the American consumer.
If I'm but that's actually exactly what's going on. If I'm
Yeah.
a white man
Yeah.
in a car manufacturing company, I used to make a widget that was $8. Now I can sell it to 10. I don't give a fuck if Sally and Joe has to buy eggs that used to be $2 and $3. I don't care. I'm like, okay, Trump made my widget that used to cost $8.
Right, but
now I
then
can sell it for
here's
10.
the thing.
Yes,
No,
vote
no.
Trump.
The companies are benefiting. The companies are all for this, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the workers are getting paid a set salary.
Yes. Now, whether that trickles down to wage is a different issue.
It is a different issue.
Yeah,
and
but
I know
if
I'm
I were a white man
Hmm.
in Detroit, I mean, I'll be like, I'll wait and see. But if my company's doing better, if my company's paying, like getting paid like $10 versus $8 like before, then I'm gonna vote for Trump.
Yeah.
And then maybe later on, if I look at my bank account and I'm like, oh wait a second, my pay didn't actually increase,
Yeah.
then I'll be like, fuck Trump. But right now, I'm like, oh yeah, like my wage is selling at $10 right now. Like I love Trump. That's what's going on. Maybe later they'll look at their bank account and be
Yeah,
like,
'cause-
you do have a point. Like would that actually benefit like me? I don't know.
Because I've been looking at Trump's, was it? Approval ratings. And they're surprisingly high for the amount of negative sentiment that's being put out on the media. It's at 48%.
The thing is, what's the negative media?
Right, just like mainstream media.
Mainstream
what Trump
media.
calls them mainstream
Exactly. So that actually, for a white man
Mm.
in Detroit, I don't care what CNN says. I don't care what, like,
media. Heck, even the Wall Street Journal.
heck, even the Wall Street
Yeah.
Journal. I'm just gonna listen to like Alex Jones,
Yeah.
Joe Rogan, and so it doesn't really matter what CNN says at this point.
I think what complicates things is that, like you said, it's not a smart contract where your salary gets paid. It's not immediately tied to profits of the company.
Yeah.
Sure, there are like job positions like sales or whatever, like banking, finance, that are tied to your profits, but it's just there's a lag, there's a little downtime where the company or your salary catches up to that macro effects.
Yeah.
So the company gets the benefit. Sure, the profits will be shown on the on their 10K or whatever.
Yeah.
But then, is it gonna show immediately in salary?
Probably not.
99% of the time,
99%
no.
won't.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This is what Trump does well. If he only promised tariffs will increase your wages, then he's fucked. But that's not what he did. He said everything else that a white man would like. So as a package, that's why people are okay with him. People support him. Because he said, like, this is not what I'm saying, but he says stuff that's like, bad, women are bad, and we're like, well, he doesn't say that, but like,
I don't think he's ever said.
not women are bad, but like,
specifically.
he's like very like, anti-DEI, like anti-DEI. That's for sure what he does.
Yeah.
Like white man, like not only in terms of your job, you've been fucked, but like every other like schools are fucking you. Like the education system's fucked, and you're like a victim. Like he says everything else that's like that a white man wants to hear. So
like
that's why he like this whole tariff thing is on brand.
No, I
He's a
agree.
great marketer.
So it's a good retort, but then it's not. It's gonna show sooner or later.
Yeah.
In their pockets.
Yeah.
As they realize that their pockets are thinning in terms of the inflationary pressures. Like it's already out in the media. Like eggs are getting expensive. Cars are getting expensive. So when they realize that it's not catching up to their salary, then obviously it's gonna it's gonna hinder the consumer consumption of the economy, and then it's gonna create this like weird effect where, the companies had first reaped the benefits of tariffs, and then now the salary didn't increase correlated to the increase of profits. So then the consumption goes down, and then the companies face the recessionary decrease in the consumption. So they stop hiring. They start firing people.
So if that were that could be likely, but in that case, do you think Trump would become less popular though? Because my point is, even if that did happen, which that makes perfect sense, I think that would happen. But my point is, even if that did happen, Trump does everything else so well in terms of marketing that I don't think people would care, and I think he would still be popular amongst white men.
So
What do you think?
what I have in my mind is there's a huge segment that we're missing from this conversation, and that's housing,
Okay.
right? A lot of middle class, we tend to think that they own a house, but then contrary to it, I don't think that's the majority
Yes,
of the market.
people are broke.
A lot of people are still paying rents. They
Yeah.
don't have transit system in Korea like we do,
Yeah.
so they're paying rents, and rents are getting more expensive.
Yep.
And I think the increase or decrease in the rent is tied to the 30-year mortgage bonds interest rate, which has stayed up continually, even though the Fed has sort of like been dovish on increasing the federal fund rate. It's still up in the air in the 7% range, and I think that's primarily because I talked to Mike before, but the Fed has decreased its purchase volume of MBS,
Okay.
which used to serve its purpose in liquidating the mortgage market, and has worked great for the homeowners because their prices have gone up, because their asset values increase, because the demand for securities is rising.
Yeah.
It drove the real estate market, but now that it has become so expensive for people to buy homes and for rent as well, because they have to keep up that profit range, I think somehow he's talking with the Fed that
He's what?
he's talking with the Federal Reserve that let's keep the housing market down in check by
Okay.
stop buying the MBS.
So, just to clarify, I did search up the U.S. home ownership rate. In 2024, it's 65.6%. So most Americans are homeowners, but I do want to clarify the way they actually get this data is how many people, just individuals, own a home on paper. So it doesn't take into account the amount of equity you actually have in the home. It doesn't take into account how much you have in loans against the home and how much you're paying in terms of mortgages. So when you take that into consideration, I do agree. I do agree that housing prices are having negative impacts on the American consumer. But just to clarify, 65.6% home ownership rate in the United States.
Wait, so I do want to ask Jason this question. So Trump wants to keep housing markets down by stopping the Fed from purchasing MBSs. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that used to historically drive up asset values. So if I were not a homeowner, that is actually what I would love Trump because it allows me to buy homes at a cheaper price. So to that 65% though, what's interesting is I think that's a national average.
It is a national average.
So if we bifurcate that, with Trump voters versus non-Trump voters, my bet is Trump voters.
Landed the 40,
They're
35%.
they're like very, very like high up there. Like 70% will not own a home, whereas like Trump haters will most likely have
So-
like 70% home ownership.
My point against that is that the
Probably
voter
is.
base for the Republican Party is it's
Well-
at the two sides of the spectrum in terms
Yeah.
of wealth, right?
Yeah.
So the super rich vote for Republicans, and the super
Super-
poor
Mm.
tend to also vote Republicans, but for different reasons. And
Yeah.
the middle class tends to vote Democrats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
In
I
the
think,
States.
yeah, in the States. Now that being said, here's my. So I think on average, in terms of home ownership, I don't think the statistics really matter that much. But the United States has a very interesting mortgage system in general, where it's a 30-year fix, whereas every other country in the world, it's fixed for like 3 to 5 years, and then it's variable rate after that, right?
Yeah.
So this incentivizes people to refinance their mortgage at market rate at any specific given time. Whereas in the United States, a lot of home transactions happen when interest rates are near zero. And it
Yeah.
doesn't happen, it dries up like a fucking desert when interest rates shoot up above like long-term averages. So as a result, what I've been seeing based on the material that I've been reading, home prices haven't felt a dip because people just aren't buying homes. And they're just holding on to their mortgages.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's actually kind of going against what Jason's
Yeah.
saying. Because Jason's saying that by the Fed not purchasing MBSs in
Yeah.
their normal Fed operations, that should supposedly drive asset
Housing
values
prices
down.
down.
So
But
like
what you're saying is
Yeah.
because people are locking in 0% interest rates for 30 years, it's like doesn't even matter.
what's happening is new home buyers
Uh-huh.
are drying up because the mortgage interest rates haven't fallen from their all-time highs because of the illiquidity in the mortgage-backed securities market. That's separate from the people who are looking to sell a home, who are no longer looking to sell because they realize they can't get a better deal.
Okay.
Right. But what historically, and this is why you start understanding why economics is a separate topic and why people have PhDs in the subject. Historically, what happens is people are actually, the home ownership rate is actually super tied to the labor market because people are beholden to a house. They tend not to look for employment opportunities too far from their house.
Okay.
And usually when they sell their house, they're usually moving to a different geography.
Okay.
So what's happening is, and this is actually true, certain markets, certain pockets of the country are experiencing labor shortages, whereas certain other pockets of the country are experiencing labor glut.
So, if the mortgage loan rates are kept all high, and the market decides that the risk of these mortgage loans are getting higher, which drives the rates up, then wouldn't people buy less homes over time? And that would just impact the household prices?
So that's the funny thing. If there was like ample supply in the market and demand was just doing its thing, absolutely.
Right. The
But there's
supply-
no ample supply.
Yeah, supply crunch.
Yeah, because people are just trying to wait it out and see this. But what's funny in Canada is because we have a variable rate mortgage system, our housing prices are actually coming down because they're refinancing as like their interest rates are getting higher and higher, so they're trying to dump their supply onto the market and now to buyer's market. So like new pre-built pre-construction condominium sales are down.
Yeah.
Built condominium sales are down. New and home sales are overall also down. So like it's a buyer's market. They're negotiating the prices down. Whereas in America, what we're actually seeing is, dude, I'm looking at the SeaTac area for real estate. House prices haven't come down. San Francisco haven't come down. Denver, Colorado haven't come down. Austin, the Texas Triangle haven't come down.
So wait, I missed this point. Canada's interest rate is going up.
So the Canadian interest rate also shot up, and then
Okay.
it has.
Borrowing costs are
yeah.
higher,
So
the
it just so
housing prices
happened
are going
that a
up.
lot of people were buying homes during the zero interest rate COVID era,
Yeah.
and those the early mortgages from the 2020s are up for renewal this year, and the mortgage rates aren't at 0%. They're at like 5.56%.
Okay.
People can't afford that,
Okay.
so they're dumping supply.
Okay. Got it.
So that kind of still implies a room for supply, increased supply.
Oh yeah, no, there's ample room, but
Yeah.
like the American system makes it so that the sellers have so much flexibility in their options that withdrawing their supply and artificially maintaining prices is also an option for them.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, having like the homeowners have to deal with their mortgage loans, right? So that's like the recurring costs monthly. But then, as we talked in the very beginning about the impact of tariffs on the consumption economy, as the other parts of the goods are getting expensive and the so-called fixed costs of these households are getting higher and higher, are they able to maintain that in the long term?
Who's they?
The
Administration?
consumers, the
Oh,
homeowners.
consumers,
Yeah, homeowners.
Surprisingly, based on the data that I've been reading, mortgage delinquency rates haven't risen, but credit card delinquency rates have risen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I feel like
To like a surprising level, or is it like just like a
Here, let me search it up. Yeah, so credit card delinquency rates are right now at 3.08%, which is actually slightly down from Q2 2024. But this is actually around the level that we were seeing in 2011, just after the Great Recession.
after the Great Recession?
Yeah. So the lead up to the Great Recession was just a huge wild time. At its peak, it was 7%.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So not to an alarming level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still dealing with it.
Yeah, but like you have to understand, before this time, there was no cap on credit card interest rates. Now there is.
Wait, what do you
Isn't
mean?
that being introduced by the AOC?
No. Credit card interest rates are legally capped at like 30% per year. And they're arguing
yeah,
that that's
yeah.
too high.
Oh,
Before there was no cap. People would be charging like 85%, 120% for credit card interest rates, and that was completely fine. What ended up happening with this is once they introduced a 38% hard cap, it became a lot harder for the poorest Americans
To
to
get
get credit cards,
yeah.
and they ended up going to loan sharks
Yeah, yeah.
and payday loans. Yeah. Dude, this is getting depressing.
So I want to talk more about the credit card delinquency. I think because the so-called crunch is happening in the so-called public financial institutions, what we call like legit, the first-tier banks or second-tier banks, the Fed, all credit card companies, these are all in the light. But then there's a shadowy part of the market where I hear like private equities just revering the private credit market nowadays. But then
There's
that's another like that's a really super nice package term for shadow banking,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And it's not caught in these data whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just saying that if the borrowing hurdle has gone up, most likely people will resort to these shadow banking.
So I do have a data point for this. So auto loan delinquencies are at crazy levels. Auto loan delinquencies, are at record levels right now. Third quarter 2024, it hit 6.6% subprime auto
So
loans.
credit loans are kept in check, but auto loans, which are the actual payments to those.
So auto loans actually rely heavily on shadow banking institutions such as like BlackRock and private equity firms,
Yeah.
because normal banks will not approve loans for a depreciating asset. So as a result, a lot of these subprime borrowers get approved for loans from private equity firms, and they have crazy delinquencies that are rising at an ever
So it's a
higher rate.
more holistic picture of the
So a lot of
market.
like traders are actually focusing on this, and this is actually at a higher level than in 2008 and at a higher level than during the dot-com bubble.
auto delinquencies.
It's subprime auto delinquencies. Yeah.
This is the first time I'm hearing about this, but just to play the devil's advocate,
Yeah.
doesn't that also imply that people who were previously unable to borrow cars because of their poor credit history now have the option to do so? So is that necessarily like
So
a worse thing for society?
no, so subprime auto loans have existed based on this data.
Is it like
since
the same
1990s.
credit history?
Yeah,
Okay.
because buying is inherent. Essentially, you need a car to function in America,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result, America has a huge history of like financing automobiles for the longest time. There is data for prime borrowers for automobiles, and that's obviously been in the market for a long time. Based on this data, it seems like subprime auto loans have been introduced since 1994, so it has a long track record. Prime auto loans are not that bad; it's at 0.4% delinquency. Subprime is insane right now, but here's the thing: is it a new practice? Absolutely not. It's existed for a while.
So the denominator is the same as what you're saying. It's just more people are actually not paying their payments.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
But again, we
why,
gotta
why
talk
is
about-
why is the credit card delinquency like not that
Because it's
different?
getting
Whereas
more difficult
Pay-
to get approved for a credit card loan.
so the denominator for credit card is actually changing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Because think about it this way: like when we were in America, it's very difficult to get a credit card unless if somebody co-signed for you.
Yeah.
The guarantor.
Yeah.
Mm.
Whereas, like in Canada, we have new immigrant programs where they can get a credit card, but it's a prepaid credit card. So you have to charge your credit card first, and then you can spend from your credit limit that you set at the start of the month that you prepaid for, which is kind of counterintuitive. But because we have the safety infrastructure for credit cards, it's getting more and more difficult for people with bad credit
To get credit.
and bad habits to
Yeah.
get credit cards.
Yeah.
But it's getting easier and easier for people with bad credit history and bad bad FICO scores and bad spending habits to actually get an automobile. So I think they're migrating away from credit cards to auto loans.
Because of the lack of access.
Yeah, lack of access and the lack of regulation. By the way,
I do think that's a very interesting data point. It is hard to say that because auto loans delinquencies are increasing, that is like the red herring or like the warning signal for a recession.
I don't think it's the. So I think it's a signal for sure, but I don't think there's of greater things to come. Greater things to come. So the bottom fifth of American society is struggling. I think that's how we should take it. But is the bottom fifth that responsible? Are they the linchpin in the economic system that we built? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just like
Interesting.
yeah, just as a heads up, GM Financial, their auto
Yeah.
loan arm, filed again to form an industrial bank. So a lot of these auto loaners are looking to become banks in
Yeah,
their own
yeah.
right. It is a very interesting time living in. But also, like, I do want to say, I'm not blaming the Republicans on this because all of this started, mind you, with Bill fucking Clinton
Yeah.
deregulating Dodd-Frank.
Yeah. I mean, every country's a dead fuel economy by its nature, right?
Wait,
It's
so
about that.
let's go back to since we're talking about the credit market. What about mortgages? Like, what about delinquencies on that?
I remember it being pretty stable. Let me check.
Look it up up front.
Yeah, it's always on Friday. The great thing about the internet and the age of AI is that we're able to search. Yeah. This data is surprisingly buried. Let's see. Consumer loans, credit card loans. Do they not have?
I'm looking at the single family residential mortgages. They're at all time low.
All time low.
Yeah, I would.
That's interesting. That's a
It's
different kind of story than
Mhm.
the auto loan market.
Yeah.
And that goes to my point.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of hard to extrapolate increasing auto loan delinquencies
With a recession,
with,
yeah.
with the recession.
Absolutely. I don't think any.
But it is interesting that auto loan delinquencies are going up
Yeah,
for
but-
whatever reason.
Apparently, first-time home buyers are struggling, based on this article from Business Insider. Yeah.
But isn't like BNPL market? I know they were really high. I think
Oh,
they're still doing
buy now,
alright.
pay
later.
I think they're still doing alright, right?
Yeah, but they're all. I think
Didn't one of them go public soon?
Klarna is
Klarna.
filing.
Yeah.
So.
They have a BNPL for your food delivery, by the way.
Yeah. That's
Oh,
good.
wow.
Did you see that?
No
there
way.
was so many like memes
Yeah.
about that.
Microfinance.
Yeah.
Wow.
Dude, you could BNPL just about
Anything now, yeah.
That's crazy.
So Klarna is actually profitable, which is crazy.
Have you guys ever used BNPL?
Never.
Me neither.
But like, here's the thing: in Korea, you guys already have BNPL.
Yes, which is also
Yeah.
interesting.
It's
that
embedded
this
into
could be
your
a
credit
thing.
card system,
Yeah.
right?
It's so weird how that is a thing, like
Yeah.
embedded in our system, where
Yeah.
it's like in the States, there's a unicorn based on that.
Because it doesn't exist in the States. I've never used that service. Even in Korea, it just
Me
doesn't
neither.
feel natural to me.
Me
My
too.
wife uses it.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Every time she swipes for an expense over like $500, 3 months zero interest. I'm like, oh wait, it's zero interest. It's a no fucking brainer.
It
But
is a no-brainer.
but
it's
there is a
just
catch.
so interesting.
those sorts of purchases don't qualify for your points.
I
Oh,
see.
okay.
So
Yeah.
it's a pick your poison type of deal.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So I actually did read the fine print. I'm like, there's no way the banks are literally
Why
just
would
like
they
giving
do
you
that?
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I realized, oh, it's points or this. Oh, okay, this makes so much more sense.
Oh, so that's how the Koreans.
Yeah.
That's
See,
super interesting.
Can I say something that's like, I don't have like 100% conviction, but
Sure.
I have like a 40% conviction on this. I think Koreans are fucking great at consumer ideas and consumer like startups and consumer products. Like this being the case, like this BNPL came from Korea
Yeah.
first, or started in Korea first. That's like a really smart way for banks to offer that.
Yeah.
That's really smart.
It is. So like I've actually talked when BNPL was just like reaching Series A, Series B in America. I talked to a lot of Korean entrepreneurs trying to replicate the model here, and I thought to myself, like, I don't think it's going to work because all the credit card companies offer BNPL.
Right.
Turns out, yeah, none of them actually made it past Series A because it's so difficult to get market penetration with consumers
Right.
when this option's already readily available.
Yeah.
I think it's an inherent problem with the private credit is that it may offer very attractive interest rates at the yield, then the time it takes for you to actually realize your gains, including your principal, it's going to be long. It's going to be longer than the traditional, what do you call that? The maturity period.
You're talking about the bank's perspective. It's hard to get money, make money through BNPL.
I think he's talking about how the
It's harder
duration is
to
long.
exit. It has a long private credit has a longer maturity.
Oh, just in general.
Yeah,
Okay,
than the
okay.
banks.
I mean, like, if we're talking about the funnel, right? The banks, commercial banks, tend to get the creme de la creme in terms of their choosing, and then it just filters down to the rubbish.
Wait, so your point is you have to lend private credit, which has a longer maturity,
Yeah.
but from a bank's perspective, you're also borrowing money, which is a shorter duration than how much you lend it. So it's like
I think
there's a duration issue.
because the banks are regulated,
Uh-huh.
they need to really keep check on the maturity and the delinquency rates.
Uh-huh.
But then the credit, on the other hand, are not regulated,
Yeah.
so they do not have the extent of so-called fiduciary duty to the investors
Uh-huh.
in terms of giving their money back. They have less duty.
Oh, you're talking about
That they
just
have
private
deadlines.
credit shops.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, which means longer durations, and even if they meet their maturity, it's likely that the loaners are not going to be able to pay back in time,
Right.
and there's a greater risk.
It's harder to run a private credit shop. than
Yeah,
a bank
yeah, exactly.
In terms of duration
Mm-hmm.
and managing delinquency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But they also, but I don't know why, but isn't it also really a lucrative business to be in? Because I know like a lot of PE shops are in that because it is.
I think because they tend to target the manufacturing industry.
And they also get like, they get compensated for that risk.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah, uh-huh.
Like higher interest rates.
Yeah, they charge it up to like 12 to
12,
15.
yeah.
Mm. It's way better than REITs, really. While REITs offers like 6 to 7%, like who would not want
Mm-hmm.
a return of 10 to 15%?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
I love learning.
yeah, that's sort of
It's a great.
Yeah.
It's a great.
But it's a new market that I'm learning too.
Uh-huh.
Because now I'm headed into like a real estate finance.
Right,
Like
right.
I'm seeing more of the family offices and all these so-called private investors be getting engaged in this private credit business.
Ooh, I have a topic that I have not had the chance to read about, but I would love to learn.
Yeah.
Private equity in Korea is becoming an issue because of MBK
MBK.
and Homeplus.
yeah.
Mm.
What's going on? Someone tell me. I know it's an issue. I don't know what the issue is.
Jason, why don't you take a crack at it?
So, like the standard practice for private equities is to leverage out and then have that debt booked into the company's balance sheet.
Yep.
And then the company has to reap its get its profits funneled back to the private equity. That's how the thing goes. But then, I think the level of these, the percentage of dividend that the company has to pay out to the fund, depends on the company's business model. So we saw a lot of these huge companies, retail companies, with bad profits, but then as they rack up debt and as they rack up a lot of interest expense to cover, naturally that dividend percentage has to go up at some point. I don't think MBK had in mind to exit this company at like cash and cash something X percentage, like 2X in the beginning. It's just like standard MBA grad, like the trend thing where they just started a fund, search fund, and then buy up a HVAC company with a good cash flow, and then exit at like a par value with fat dividends incurred over 5 years. And that's their gains, literally. Like MBK did the same, I think. So when they held that company, I don't know for how long, but I think it went over to 2025. So they held this company for about 10 plus years. I think it happened in 2012. So yeah, 10 plus years. And now that they have realized enough gains, they're free to just declare this company bankrupt at the expense of other investors. But of course, like
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Their bankruptcy?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
so they declared that
Recently?
bankruptcy. Yeah, they declared bankruptcy without the agreement of the credit investors,
Mm-hmm.
which is very unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
But then similar thing happened to KKR too when they acquired like an ESG themed bike company, e-bike company in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is this is in Europe. So they bought it for like several billion. I think Shinhan was one of the prime credit investors at the time.
Oh, okay.
I think they funded like each one or something, and then KKR declared bankrupt. after realizing the gains.
Is that possible? Isn't it like if you think about the different tranches and like stakeholder like
Yeah.
priority, isn't
So
the
I think
credit holder-
I think it was a covenant issue.
Oh,
So it
interesting.
wasn't like I would presume that institutions like Shinan would get nitty gritty on the covenant.
Yeah.
But then somehow it just happened without the consent of Shinan.
How does that somehow happen though? That's so interesting.
I don't know. Like it could be the tranches among the investors, credit investors. Maybe Shinan was a Husuni, and like there are other Samsuni credit investors.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is the whole like news cycle that's currently going on about like what societal good does private equity have?
Mm-mm.
Is that like what people are discussing, or are they like talking about that covenant or
So like people in the
What are
industry are
people
obviously
saying?
getting into the nitty gritty
Yeah,
details.
yeah, yeah.
The media
Yeah.
cycle is focusing on the fact that they declared bankruptcy protection as a way to proactively guard against actual bankruptcy, which is kind of, I mean, like it sure you could do that technically, but was that warranted? And second of all, the bigger issue from a retail investor's perspective is, so they were liquidating their credit card purchases and their merchant debt,
Mm.
right? They were liquidating it with financial brokers to the broader market,
Mm.
who are buying these as bond instruments.
can you say that again?
So essentially,
They're borrowing off of the inventory.
yeah, they're borrowing off of the inventory and then they're
Homeplus?
yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
so they're
Yeah.
doing asset-based
asset-based financing.
financing.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then they were liquidating it on the open market through the securities firms.
Okay. ABS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then consumers were buying it, but then
Consumers can buy ABS. Oh, shit.
yeah, like high
Okay.
net worth individuals
Okay.
and like
Mhm.
and VIPs at banks and shit like that.
I didn't
But
know that was an option. Okay.
like,
Multifamily.
the main issue is that Homeplus did this right before their credit rating was going to drop.
Mm.
Did what?
Huh?
Homeplus did what?
Homeplus
Issued
issued it
the
at a
ABS.
higher
Oh, okay, okay,
credit
okay.
rating
Okay,
than they
okay,
were
okay.
going to be
Those
like,
ABSs.
yeah, in like
Okay,
2
okay.
weeks time, and they were already so the main debate is, did they know this beforehand?
Wait, I'm so confused because isn't that like the smart thing to do?
No, it is, but then at the same time the Korean regulation stipulates that
Yeah.
if you knew
Unless you
if-
did like fraudulent.
yeah,
like,
but if you were privy to this information and you
Yeah.
were essentially
you
trying
didn't
to
disclose it.
trying to just pull a fast one from the retail investors,
A rug pull.
yeah, a rug pull,
It's a
then
rug pull.
that is potentially fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, did they disclose enough information?
Yeah.
Mm.
Or like if they knew it, did they disclose it? If they didn't disclose it, did they know it? And like if they knew it, they didn't disclose it, then this is
I
fraudulent.
have so many technical questions
Mm.
because this is super interesting. In the case of, okay, I have two questions.
Mm.
Number one, MBK is the PE owner, right?
Yeah.
So they have equity in the business, obviously.
Yeah.
Mm. But it was a
Everything else-
leveraged buyout.
But all the other leverage comes from banks.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that they are accused of proactively declaring bankruptcy
Mm.
so that it's like better for them right now.
Mm-mm.
As an equity holder, doesn't your equity get wiped out in a bankruptcy? So why would that actually help MBK?
No, equity doesn't get wiped out. What happens is that the credit line get
So the debt
immediately
gets
affected.
restructured before
Yeah.
in a bankruptcy.
So the
proceeding.
first thing
So
that
it's-
the court tells the
Yeah.
company to do
Is-
is restructure the rebalance of debts. So in terms of tranches, like you have A to C, C will get wiped out. Like the court will order them to like, okay, C tranche guys, how about you guys just convert this into equity, and just deploy just coerce the company to deploy measures that would just
So
turn the
equity
company
would
around.
get wiped out.
No,
first.
that's in chapter 7.
Yeah. So
This
there's
is
a
chapter
Okay.
13.
there's a
Chapter
Kyo
thirteen.
Pasan
Uh-huh.
versus like the Pasan.
Okay, okay.
So those two are different things.
Yeah.
Mm.
So this is a real one.
Yeah.
So chapter 13 is restructuring. Chapter
Right.
7 is actual bankruptcy.
Mhm.
Okay.
So like workout version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Mhm.
Now my second question is, in the case of maybe for sure for like a liquidation case, an asset-based loan, like an ABS holder, is definitely the most they have the highest claim, right? In terms of tranches.
So like what?
So why would they?
So-
are they actually impacted? Is my case.
So based on everything I've been reading, apparently MBK and Homeplus is claiming that they sold it wholesale to the securities firms. Ergo, it's the lowest of the tranches. And the securities firms are claiming, no, we had an agreement that this was to be sold to retail investors. So like, who was in charge of selling this to retail investors? Did Homeplus instate the help of the securities firms to liquidate it against the retail, or did the securities firms buy it wholesale and then liquidate on their own terms?
Wait, how can ABS be on the lowest tranches?
Like if it was a wholesale transaction and they had an agreement essentially. Because in Korea, apparently under Korean law, and I'm pretty sure in like America too, it depends on who you're selling to. If you're selling to accredited investors or investors over a certain threshold, then you are privy to different investor protections and different reporting requirements than if you sell direct to retail.
Yes.
Yeah. This is a huge point of contention because based on this, if they were essentially treat this as a retail bond, then MBK is on the hook for paying it out in full as opposed to restructuring it.
That's a different point of contention, though, right? Because it's like selling to accredited investors versus retail. Yes, for accredited investors, you need less disclaimers because they're smart enough.
No, so like
Well, people- But
it's
did they fuck? Like,
yeah,
the
no,
retail
so it's
investors
a dual layer issue. So like, were they privy to this information and did they disclose it?
disclose it or not?
That's yes or no.
Because
Black
if
and white
they,
issue.
right, because just to clarify, just so I understand, if they were to sell it to retail investors, if they knew this issue, they should have disclosed it.
Absolutely.
Because they're not high net worth
Yeah.
people. My question is, but even if like
Mm.
shit hit the fan,
Mm.
is ABS still impacted? Because by definition, if companies liquidate, you're guaranteed by that asset.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm assuming Homeplus has enough assets to cover the ABS lenders, right?
Oh, actually, no, I don't think they do.
So
Like, do you get my question?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
like, I mean, I have this, I can sell this to you,
yeah.
but like, I'm gonna loan against this.
Oh no. So
Right,
the main,
so, like,
main
I'm
issue
assuming-
is so the asset-backed paper, commercial paper, whatever you want to call it. The money that they got from liquidating this is in the bank, but their short-term obligations are coming up due. That's why they declared bankruptcy,
Okay.
and now they're trying to figure out. Do they pay
Okay.
off the short-term debt with this
Okay.
money? Are they
Okay.
allowed to do that, or do they have to pay this off first? Was this even legal and shit like that? That's why it's a whole hodgepodge.
So they're sorting out the priorities.
Yeah, so it's not just like the asset-backed loans that's the issue.
Mhm.
It's like the
That's
overarching.
that's not even the issue. Is what?
Yeah.
It's not even like the main point. Is what you're
The
Because,
saying.
main
even
point
if
is
it's
bankruptcy.
asset backed,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everything's a timeline based. So
Yeah,
yeah, within the investors agreement, like
Yeah.
there must be the seniority that's applied.
so
Seniority. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
word I was.
Mm-hmm.
so like one of the short-term debts with high seniority is coming up due, and they're like, dude, I don't have the money to pay you back, so declare
Mhm.
bankruptcy. And then they realize, wait a second, you did this, pay us back with this money. It's like,
Right.
wait, and then all of a sudden they realize, wait, did you disclose this? When did this happen? And that's like
Interesting.
how it's
Yeah,
unraveled.
yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read zero things about this.
No, it's
so
fine.
now I'm like learning.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
But like to your point, so like this distrust in private equity funds, it's not just a Korea only issue, it also exists in America because
Yeah.
private equity has a terrible track record of keeping companies open,
Mhm.
but it has a great track record of returning funds to its investors. And I don't think those two are fundamentally aligned.
Because some of the erroneous use has been made that the Kuminyoung got ripped off.
Oh
This
wow!
But
How?
it was just a wild accusation. But then
Okay.
Kuminyoung made a
What?
statement that we got our returns.
Okay,
So,
okay, that's
we're in the
interesting.
same team.
How do people even like accuse?
I think it was based off of the fact that they were supposed to have 7% equity in the firm or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
then,
firm?
Homeplus.
Oh, Home
And then,
Plus.
and then within the firm, I think they got the name of the funds, and Kuminyoung wasn't one of them, as in the equity investor and the credit investor. So they think they got ripped off along the process of 기업회생제에서. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that was their accusation, but yeah, they made a statement. But because the media was focused on all these private equities ripping off companies, and it's a sort of an ethical issue too. If you think about the jobs that are being lost along the process. So the 국민연금, I think the National Pension Fund developed a policy that they will never ever
Be an LP for a PE
be an LP
firm?
for a PE firm that does
Interesting.
hostile M&A takeovers.
Oh,
Starting
that was
this
recently-
February.
Oh,
Yeah.
because of MBK?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, so it is a pretty big issue.
Mhm.
But like, so.
But isn't that like historically like the biggest LPs in funds? Like
Yeah.
국민연금?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow, so that is a pretty
It is-
bad.
So the other LPs will follow suit too.
Yeah, that's so
The
interesting.
National Pension Service is the LP in
Yeah.
South Korea.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
So, but like, it's a matter of, you're right, it's an ethical issue. Like, what function are private equity funds supposed to serve in the broader financial ecosystem? To be honest, keeping companies open, I think doesn't fundamentally align with returning money to shareholders. And I think the term private equity fund already gives away, like, these are financial institutions that are supposed to generate returns.
And the LPs, like National
Want
Pension
money.
Funds, needs to increase their
Yeah.
budgets
Yeah.
for the sake of their pensions.
Right.
But then what's the
Yeah.
point if you increase the pensions at the expense of taxpayers'
Right.
jobs,
Right.
right?
Like,
That's a conflict of interest.
yeah, so like that's where the conflict exists, but I would argue that if you're able to generate high enough returns, it should create and to generate enough of a revenue stream to create a larger safety net for people who are unemployed as well.
Right.
Then I think it's more than justified for creating a better, a more robust corporate environment. Because a lot of these companies, especially in Korea, on their balance sheet, they hold a shit ton of assets and they don't actually generate meaningful revenues. Do those companies really deserve to exist when they are no longer competitive? And this is when you can see my NYU side shining through me brightly.
I mean, like we said before, real estate does get in the way of getting the right valuation and returning the right value for the investors, because it just gets discount.
Can I say one thing? Is I think there's also an element of jealousy
Towards
private equity professionals, because
Yeah.
like sure there's a whole debate about like what society, like what good do they do to society. Like my personal take is like, yes, if you build something, like if you build software, build hardware, like that's clear that you're doing something for society versus like PE guys. But like compared to like, there's so much worse things that you could be doing in private equity that people don't talk about because people are jealous towards private equity professionals for earning that much.
That's also
Do you
true.
also agree? Like, that's not the worst thing that they're
But
doing.
I want to
Yeah.
address the real estate part
Yeah.
first. So Homeplus actually owned all their locations.
It was all on their balance sheet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they didn't lease any of their locations. They owned all of it.
Okay.
And as a result, like they had a huge balance sheet compared to the revenues.
Okay.
And like one of MBK's first jobs when they went in was liquidating all these
That
rental,
makes sense.
yeah, and then
Yes.
Makes sense.
trying to generate got a lot of that cash, paid off a lot of the LBO leveraged debt, and then paid dividends to investors as well, right? But having those assets on the balance sheet, in the Korean corporate sense, it's like stability. But from a cash flow generating perspective, that's like idle capital.
Yeah.
It's not that investor
So
friendly.
like, I feel like they did a good job regarding that. But
So they actually did some good.
but stripping away the real estate assets made the company unstable. But that's only because the fundamental business was unstable. I argue.
I don't even know what a Homeplus does.
See, that's the issue.
I don't think I've ever been to a Homeplus.
Offline commerce, offline groceries.
Groceries?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a Walmart.
Is that Walmart? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and it used to be partially owned by Tesco.
Really?
Yeah. But anyway, barring that, going back to your point, yeah, no, there's fundamental jealousy because This actually ties back in nicely to our point in the beginning. Dude, Korea is a manufacturing country. These guys have grease on their faces. They're sweating in the workshops, and then these guys in high-rise towers in Yeouido, looking down on the world from like the 30 plus story view.
Yeah, you want to take them down.
Yeah.
And you want to create a story to take them down.
Yeah.
And then it's like, fuck PE.
Yeah,
That's
but
what's
like
going on.
America feels the same way about Wall Street,
Yeah.
right?
I think, I mean, this is dangerous statement to make, but if Koreans want to make more money as individual investors, or like heck, they can just invest in REITs, get access to that institutional investing, they have to be more friendly towards PE practices.
They have to be more friendly
Wait,
towards
why?
financial markets.
Why?
Because they have to understand the concept that the companies holding in the real estates in their books and not selling them is bad for their returns.
So you're saying, just in general, Korea needs a more higher level of finance.
They have to think in
Yeah.
terms of the investor perspective that they are the one that should be
Like,
reaping the benefits.
you guys have been working.
That is a good.
It's a good point.
It's a good point, and it's good for society
Yeah.
for finance
But-
to evolve.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it is. This also goes back to your point about the National Pension Service. Is it job security you want as a society?
But I think that ties into labor elasticity. Right?
Elasticity.
Yeah. So if the lateral shift is doable, then obviously it's better for the economy.
Right, but the
Wait,
rules-
can you repeat that?
So if the Homeplus employees
Mm-hmm.
are fired and they can find immediate jobs and like say, and it wouldn't happen, but like
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
say e-commerce companies
Uh-huh.
or like ima트, if that shift is immediately possible.
Then it doesn't matter.
Then
if
it doesn't
we-
matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But then
right.
it becomes harder because of the
Right.
so-called labor regulations, all these stringent labor laws that
makes it
makes
hard.
it
hiring,
conservative,
firing,
yeah,
like,
conservative
super
hiring
slow.
process. Then that's what impedes the market. in general.
this is what a lot of founders actually
Uh-huh.
argue for as well, because it's very difficult to fire an employee.
Yeah.
It's very like they grow weary of hiring new ones.
Right.
Right, and as a result, it's very difficult to for people who are looking for jobs to find meaningful jobs in a short amount of time. You're right, and this actually leads to corporations being more conservative with their budgets
Yeah.
and just investing into safe assets.
But you know what I think is also very interesting is I think a lot of these protections for workers and labor unions is somewhat warranted in Korea because of the long fucking hours. Like people work so much in Korea. Like people want to cut that. Like I get the argument for cutting work hours to 50. I get it. Not that I like
You don't
support it.
abide by it.
I don't abide by it. I get why people argue for that in Korea because Korean work culture fucks the average Joe in terms of like like work, and I get why they want protection against firing, and I get why they want like the 52-hour work week.
I feel like work hours and firing are two separate
You
issues.
think it's
that I-
separate?
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, because think about it. Just because, dude, if you're a so in Korea, there's this interesting culture. I think it's a totally cultural thing. If you are a
I was talking
high-performing,
about culture.
high-performing worker
Yeah.
and you get your work done on time, heck, even earlier, they see you idling about. They don't see that as you being efficient. They see that as you being fucking lazy. So
Okay.
they consistently fill up your bandwidth until you have to work overtime. I think that's a cultural issue. We have to solve this with regulations. That's fine. But hiring and firing it's a contractual obligation between two parties, but then we're forcing these people to essentially get married. Is that fair? I don't know. I don't think so.
So you're actually for cutting out
Hours.
but you're for like more lenient
Hiring and firing, yeah.
Okay. That makes sense too.
Yeah.
It is a separate issue actually.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
So like I'm actually for labor unions.
Yeah.
But I'm against labor unions keeping people's jobs when the corporation no longer needs their services.
Yeah.
Like in America, downsizing obviously happens, But primarily, unions fight for workers' rights in terms of like contractual, like was it for wage increases and for hour limits. But they don't argue for specific job quotas.
Yeah. They don't argue for job security.
Yeah. Because they understand, dude, like you need to survive in order to provide us with a job. But if you want our services, you're gonna have to pay up at least this much.
This all makes sense. My next question is, why is it so hard for hiring and firing in Korea then? Like, who set this law up in the first place?
Right. So I think
why was this law
So,
ever?
I'm actually reading was it Why Nations Fail by Darren Asamoah.
I heard that's a good one.
It's a fucking great book. I wish I had more time to read it, and I'm gonna force myself to dedicate more time to reading it. But one of his main arguments throughout the entire book is the history creates a sort of inertia in the society where people just continue to behave in such a way. So one of the reasons America was able to break away from a lot of traditions was because, first of all, nobody wanted to go to America because there was no gold. So as a result, they developed structures to incentivize people to come there, and that created a sort of inertia where America is built upon incentive systems. Whereas in traditional societies like Europe, China, Korea, it was super feudal up until very recently. And as a result, like there's this idea that, dude, if I hire you, I own you.
Because it's feudal.
Yeah. So it's a bit like a slavery type thing. So the power dynamics are super different.
Korea had the longest history of slavery.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So I feel like that has a lot to do with it, right? It's where essentially, as the owner, I treated you like a slave. And like, dude, if I don't need you, I'm gonna cut you from my workforce. I'm gonna make sure you can never get fucking hired again. So there has to be rules and regulations to protect against that. But I feel like as a society, haven't we?
We went too much the other way.
Haven't we reached the point where everyone got that out of their system?
But was that the case in like corporate settings in Korea where like it was very feudal?
Yeah.
Was that ever a case?
Yeah.
Or,
No, because it was built upon the Japanese corporate system, which had very similar dynamics to the Japanese feudal systems, where you work for one employer for your entire life. Like, my wife tells me she used to work for a big conglomerate, right? She told me as she was leaving, it's like, dude, you know, if I leave this job, I'm never going to be able to come back again. I thought that was the strangest thing.
So because of that like weird toxic slave owner mentality, we went too far the other way to protect labor rights, right?
And mostly it's through political movements.
That's also
Yes.
Yeah.
politics. So Asamoah also argues that the history creates inertia, which creates the political systems, which creates economic incentives.
Yeah.
So how do we fix that?
Like essentially, his like I've only gotten so far into the book, but it feels like to me, the way he's arguing and the way that's it's only possible is we become aware of these and then we try to like actively mitigate against these sorts of historical baggage, but it's very difficult.
That's like asking individuals to fight for climate change.
Yeah. So it's nigh on impossible.
I feel like there is a historical cycle, like that book mentions. There has to be some point of failure, like whether for Roman Empire or like even United States or us. But a lot of such point of failure, the time to failure, is getting elongated because of the capital markets and the so-called like IMFs and all these AIIB stepping in to like freshen the capital, make the pacts for their own good. People have become better at negotiating. I think that's why the time to failure has significantly been delayed as to prior empires. But this labor law thing, I think it's completely political and kind of bipartisan too. So nobody wants to step into that realm of fixing the labor laws, because that impacts the middle class, the high wage earners, and the low income families, like everyone.
Where do you feel like Korea is in terms of like the life cycle of a country?
I feel like this is our final point, and then we have to wrap up for today. But
Yeah.
you first. How far along are we on the civilization text tree?
Michael, you start first.
Honestly, right now, it feels to me like if I had to pick a point in American history, it feels to me like this might be the start of the Great Depression era.
Wow.
Mm.
Why?
Or it might be something akin to just before, just as FDR came into power, maybe.
Okay. Why?
Because there's a lot of issues with society, and there's a lot of social safety nets that just simply aren't there, and there are like a lot of people are now talking about the issues surrounding that. So I think the next administration and the administration following have to address these issues before we could actually build on top of that for a more financially stable future. Like before FDR, there was no social safety net in America. And it was super shaky, and there were bubbles and hype cycles and booms and bust cycles to to the edges of your imagination, right? Korea's gone through the same thing. Like there's kimchi premium. Did you know there's a kimchi premium for gold in this country? Gold is more
there's a
expensive.
kimchi discount on stocks.
Yeah.
Crypto, but
So crypto, yeah, but most recently, gold as well.
Yeah.
Because these people do not trust the financial systems anymore,
Right.
Like America went through the same thing. Like the Dodd-Frank Act was enacted during FDR's reign, I think, or at least Truman. But a lot of financial regulations happened during that time. I'm not saying all those regulations were good, but I'm saying it started a dialogue
FDR.
for more trust in the system.
yeah.
And FDR actually also created the FDIC, the federal, which enabled more trust within the financial system.
government, Keynesian economics.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this might be Korea's time because, dude, Korea's government GDP, government debt to GDP ratio is below 65%, which is super low for a developed economy.
So we can lever a bit more.
Yeah.
Spend it on society.
Yeah, and I've been arguing for this for like the longest time.
You're the anti-Doge.
I sort of am. So I don't know how my American visa is gonna be approved if people see this, but yeah, what's your take?
I think what I'm really concerned about Korea right now is kind of tied to what you said in the beginning. There's a lot of social unrest and anxiety in terms of accumulating the wealth. People are anxious about real estate. As you guys see in the recent news, all this the key districts in Gangnam getting restricted into the trading regulations have actually exacerbated the markets in terms of accessibility to the new home buyers. It made it more expensive. It made people not able to use, it actually worsened their people's ability to leverage. So people can no longer buy homes with the appropriate leverage that they used to enjoy back in the early 2000s. So it's creating this anxiety and unrest. What comes after will probably be frustration that will come from both sides of the market. The home buyers, the homeowners feeling they aren't getting the right capital gains, and the home buyers feeling that they're excluded from the so-called elite society. So all this eventually will tie into the because I feel like there's a lot of that qualitative aspect that we're depending on in society to keep the society safe and livable. Korea has been viewed as a country with more ethics, more social security, because people are used to living under the system. And I feel like once people think that it's against their benefit to actually live under the system and constantly think about how to be off-grid to make money, then I feel like there's a great concern for social security.
You know, I after hearing his response, I actually want to switch mine.
What's up?
We're living in 80s America right now.
80s America.
Why?
where the rich keep getting richer, everyone is anxious, but then a lot of that happened because of unfair systems and unfair regulations within the system, and then I'm afraid this might actually happen. Bill Clinton comes up and then fucks up everything even more, so that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer.
Did Bill Clinton do that? He
Bill
did
Clinton-
really well, I think, under his
No, so like macroeconomic figures, absolutely. Like he deregulated the bank industry so that they could actually just like hypercharge the mortgage-backed securities market, and he actually instigated the fall in
one can argue that.
2008. So I don't think it's so like hate me if you want. I don't. George W. Bush is a dunce. I don't think he actually did anything except cause a war in Iraq, which is
Small thing.
yeah, small thing, obviously. But I don't think he caused the '08 financial crisis. I think that was Bill Clinton.
So you're saying
I think we might have a Bill Clinton moment
where we start
where we start because
deregulating everything that
there's
actually backfires on us
there's a lot of talk for deregulation as well.
Yeah.
in terms of
Financial markets,
Real estate.
markets.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, we're all for it, but
It's gonna backfire.
again, we have to understand we're not in like those disadvantaged positions where we have to worry about our day-to-day expenses. We come from privileged backgrounds where we can think about the macroeconomic picture and the strategic picture. In that regard, dude, deregulation is fucking awesome. But dude, like if we ever make a mistake in our finances and we fall back here, deregulation might not be so awesome.
It will make us poor.
Yeah.
The majority of us.
Isn't the whole argument for deregulation is like, yes, people who are rich might get richer, but also on the net whole, everyone gets richer?
So that's the
Like you
argument.
grow the pie.
That was Ronald Reagan's whole argument for trickle down economics and a rising tide floats all boats. Economists have argued time and time again, trickle down economics doesn't fucking work. They say trickle down economics is works only to enlarge the glass at the top.
It is what you see at the earnings call. People try to like fire people and do whatever to keep the profits up.
Like, I'm not saying we should default back to communism. But I'm saying stop giving money to the top where there is no multiplier effect. Give money to the bottom because those guys will spend every penny they have because they have to spend it.
But to even step further back, I think the economy should be doing great at exports.
But who are we
Korean economy.
Okay, I feel like we're gonna get too entangled in our conversation. Let's end it there.
Fun conversation.
Yeah.
See?